Okay, finally. So this is exam 3 review, spring semester 2018. Let's get started. We'll do it sort of like we've been doing it in the past. I'd like to rapidly go through some PowerPoints and show you some particular slides you might want to know about. I tried to indicate important slides in the keywords, and I put them in red, but I have not had a chance to put keywords in for the Opteron section at all. I've been struggling with that audio file, getting the sound right and uploading. People can't access it when I put it at MediaSite. So just a few minutes ago, I have now uploaded it to Vimeo, and I don't have the link yet, but after this, I'll put the link on the website, and this will be uploaded today before 6. Okay. Let me go over some slides. Well, I can just tell you about them. Okay. I put the questions in the exam this morning, so they're all fresh in my head. So let me spill the beans before I forget it. I think I remember one with a ribosome sitting on the trip attenuator. Remember that? I'm going to see if I can get that up. I'm just it's my mind. Now we got that thing going. I'd like to get that thing off. And probably the only way I can do it is go up in the chair and punch it. Hey, when you get to certain age, you go through the counter at Publix. You've been carrying this stupid little green shopping basket, like little Red Riding, little Green Riding Hood, and you put everything in there. You want this all in one bag. You want me to help you carry it out to the car? But you know, one more time, I'll give you a senior discount. There's a slide in there with the ribosome, and you got tripcodon, then you have the stop over here. And you've got hairpins. Something like that. Maybe not. Attenuation, this would be region 1, region 2, region 4 hadn't been made yet, but it's right there. And everybody knows about the attenuation thing. Maybe I should explain the attenuation because I didn't get a chance to. I put it on the audio file. That's probably best done with the projector, but we'll have a kind of a chalk talk. Anyway, I like to mess with you on this one. I'm going to put mutations in the attenuator and get you to predict the outcome in terms of whether transcription would proceed or not. So let me show you that. The trip operon. So this is an example of a biosynthetic pathway where you're trying to make the final, make a product. And it has a series of enzymatic steps that are all encoded in a single polycistronic mRNA. So this is sort of the opposite kind of operon in terms of the kinds of genes from lac, arabinose, gal. Those operons are involved in catabolism, meaning you presented a substrate and you want to degrade it. You're not trying to make anything, you're trying to degrade something and reuse it as a food source. This is the synthesis of an amino acid. So if you have a degradatory pathway, you're going to be looking for a signal that corresponds with the substance you're going to degrade, right? Lactose, you'd expect something to do with lactose would be the signal. It turns out the first step in its degradation is a beta-galactoside. And so the beta-galactoside becomes the inducer, the small molecule inducer. All these things have a big protein that either is a positive acting transcription factor or a repressor. And it either starts out active or it starts out inactive. This is an example of regulation by a repressor, but when it's first made, the TRP repressor is in an inactive configuration. So it's called an apo repressor, meaning it's not active yet. So when the apo repressor is made, no activity. Apo repressor, and tryptophan amino acid, of course, when the tryptophan binds, now it becomes active. And because the tryptophan is a small signal, it's also the end product of this pathway. It's called the co-repressor. Seems sort of silly to call it the co-repressor, but it's actually the small molecule that enables the apo repressor to now have activity as a repressor. Co-repressor would be the small molecule, in this case is tryptophan. The apo repressor is before it's activated, and this is afterwards. This now goes up and binds the operator and shuts down the activity of the operon. So as you build up the levels of the end product, you enable it to shut down activity, the feedback loop. And this is responsible for 70-fold of the regulation. This very simple negative type of regulation, meaning a repressor is involved. This is the major way the TRP operon is regulated. Okay. It also, this repressor, apo repressor conversion also is used to regulate its own promoter. So the repressor gene, the repressor gene is not formally considered, at least in this class, as part of the operon. It's the regulator of the operon. The operon would be here, and then the protein that regulates it is not considered formally a part of the operon. Some textbooks have it as part of it, others do not. So this has a simple auto feedback effect on itself, acting like a classic repressor. No fancy DNA looping involved, none of the stuff that we learned about in the LAC repressor, the Ravenose protein. This is not one that acts both as a repressor and as a positive active transcription factor. This is what most of them look like. Very simple. It's a DNA binding domain that just sits down and gets in the way of the binding by RNA polymerase. This Ravenose and LAC systems that we talked about earlier are sort of the exception in being having, I guess, more unusual or exotic ways to regulate. So most of the regulation using an aporepressor that is activated by the end product tryptophan. The second way it's regulated as a final check to prevent expression of the operon if there really is enough tryptophan. As a final check, there's a mechanism called attenuation. That is one that gets all the press. It's such an elegant control mechanism, but in reality, it's only responsible for about 10% of the negative regulation. And it's the last stopgap measure, just to make sure, to test the waters to see, asking the same question a different way. Is there sufficient tryptophan or not? So let's look at how that works. I left out one of the genes. I don't know, I can't remember the names of the genes, but I know that the first one is called TRPL. TRPL turns out to be totally there for regulation. And in fact, there's a stop of transcription possible. That is the attenuator. This whole first part, this first coding region, that's only 14 amino acids long. It's just a little, sort of like a tester strip. It's testing to see functionally, does the ribosome have to pause because it's waiting for charged tryptophan tRNA. If it doesn't have to pause, the cell knows it's got plenty of tryptophan, no matter what the aporepressor system is telling it. So how does this work? Get the eraser here. Yeah, it's easy to put the ink down, but getting it off, well, as a real man, second thought I will have some help with my bag. Yeah, could you help me out to the car? Yeah. Okay, yeah, there's no tip involved. Oh, God, we get cranky. Okay. That was fun. There we go. Attenuation. So you've got this thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this would be what the RNA would look like. It would have within it regions that are able to form hairpins. So these are called hairpin regions. These are not the hairpins. 1 and 2 can make a hairpin. 2 also can make a hairpin with 3. And 3 can go with 4. So you see that 2 got 2 options, and 3 has got 2 ways that it can be involved in a hairpin. If 3 and 4 form a hairpin, what would you expect? You expect transcription to terminate, wouldn't you? Because in the active site, you would have that string of U's, and on the DNA underneath it, you have the A's. On the template strand. Okay. If you formed a hairpin here, what would happen? It would pause. There's a site on the outside of RNA polymerase. As soon as a hairpin is possible, as soon as it comes out, of course, both sides of the hairpin have to be out the exit pore, but as soon as that happens and a hairpin forms, there's an affinity site just for duplex RNA, which means the stem of a hairpin, on the outside of the enzyme, which causes the enzyme to pause momentarily, no matter what. So in normal transcription by RNA polymerase in bacteria, the polymerase is always going along and then pausing if a hairpin forms, and then continuing. Does that all the time. It's routine. If it happens to pause when it's sitting on a stretch of A's, if the A's are actually in the active site, part of the RNA DNA duplex during that pause, termination will happen because that's such an unstable base pair. Okay. So that would cause a pause, but no termination. A pause, no termination. This now forms an intrinsic terminator. So you see the makings of a switch. If you can prevent 3 from going to 4, then you can make sure transcription will not terminate, and you will get expression of the trip operon. So how would you do that? Well, if you could tie 3 up with another hairpin region, if you could do that, then when 4 pops out the exit pore, 3 is not there to pair with it because 3 has already paired with 2. Aha. Now, if I could only figure out how to make it so 2 did not pair with 3, because this would always be inactivating the terminator, wouldn't it? So now we've got to have a switch for the switch. So how do you control the access of 2? How do you control 2's ability to distract 3? You do that with the ribosome. Depending on where the ribosome stops, if the ribosome goes all the way to here, then it will overlap onto 2. And 2 will not be able to pair with 3. And that means when region 4 pops out the exit pore, 3 now is going to go with it and terminate. So within hairpin region 1, you have this L peptide, the leader peptide. That's the double tryptophan codon. And right down here is, I think it's UGA. Anyway, it's a stop codon. And if the ribosome stops here, then 2 is completely free. It's not being blocked at all. 2 now goes with 3, and it makes sure that no termination happens. But if the ribosome has no problem with finding a charged tRNA and just zooms right to where the stop is, that means it's going to overlap with region 2, and 2 is blocked from interacting with 3, and 3 now is going to be free to go with 4. So we have the makings of a binary switch, position 1 and position 2. If the ribosome stops early, that means there's a tryptophan shortage. That means you want 3,4 not to happen. If it stops early, 2 is free to achieve that. This early hairpin, 2,3, now is possible. But if there's plenty of tryptophan, it goes all the way to the to the stop codon, then 2 can't block 3. So if it goes all the way to the stop codon, it means there's plenty of tryptophan, and that means you don't want 2 to be able to stop 3. You want termination to actually happen. This hairpin here, this early hairpin, even has a name. It's called the anti-terminator. This forms an intrinsic terminator. So it's a binary switch. The ribosome here or here. If it stops early, that means 2 is going to be able to ask 3 to the dance. And when port 4, Johnny come lately, pops out the exit port, and his sweet baby is already gone with somebody else. It's a sad tale. Attenuation. Many of you go, I think I got it. If I just remember it until Monday night. So try to talk yourself through it. It's a narrative. It's a story. You think about it in 2 ways as kind of a check on yourself. As you begin to tell the story to yourself or to your left foot or something. Think what the desired outcome should be. You start with too much tryptophan. Before you can remember all the loops and stuff, go too much tryptophan. I don't want the gene to be on. I want termination to happen. So you kind of rig your own telling of the story. Make sure you tell the story so the terminator does form. So how do you form the terminator? Well, you make sure that 2 can't interfere. That 2 2 is tied up because the ribosome is blocking.
So if you did like a mutation, you got rid of those 2 tryptophans in the beginning, it would be.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm going to do to you. I'm going to mess with you. Just when you think you got it all straight in your head, I'm going to start putting mutations in there in the form of a question and go, what would you think the outcome would be? So let's talk about some possible scenarios. That's a good question, though. You were saying if there were no tryptophans here, it would always go through because there's no reason to pause. And that means that 2 will always be blocked. And that means if 2 is blocked, you cannot form the anti-terminator, which means you're going to always terminate. And so you remove the 2 tryptophans here, you'll never ever be able to make any tryptophan.
Even if the other part of this regulation says that there should be tryptophan, like does this trump?
That's right, because this comes, if it's, well, that starts out, the aporepressor starts out not working. So it starts full on. And now it has to run up with this. It always has to run up with this. This can always override it. It's the last person in the room. That's just how some things work these days.
I'm a little confused about how the ribosome interacts with tryptophan.
Okay, so right here, the ribosome is picking up charged tRNA. Charged tRNA is the amino acid is covalently linked to the 3' end of the tRNA. And that's how it normally makes peptides. So it's got the codon region is going up to the messenger, and hanging off the tRNA is the amino acid itself. So if it can't find the appropriate codon or tRNA to match the codon, a charged tRNA, then it takes a while for it to find one, and that pausing is enough to make sure that 2 is going to be able to go with 3. So let's talk about it a different way. Let's say that the ribosome is stuck here, pause. Okay, so you've got 2, and then 3 pops out, and then you have 2, 3, and the thing pauses. But it doesn't terminate. It pauses at the anti-terminator, but region 4 hasn't even come out yet. It has no consequence. It's just like a regular old hairband because there's no stretcher used here. So let's back up one more step. Before there are any ribosomes, and you have the RNA polymerase going along. This is the exit port. And this is the DNA. The first thing to happen is 1 and 2 go together because there are no ribosomes here at all. And the ribosome binds on here and starts moving. And as the coding region starts about here, as the ribosome progresses, it will undo 1 and 2. And so if it undoes 1 and 2, then watch out for 3, 4. So if it gets stuck before it gets all the way over to 2, then 2 is free to form the anti-terminator. But if it gets to go all the way to 2 real fast, then it undoes the pause, and now it's a race. It undoes the pause, and the polymerase goes, oh, I'm going, like a slow motion race. And if it can get to 4 soon enough before the anti-terminator forms, it's going to stop. So you see, it's kind of a race. But since the ribosome undoes 1 and 2, it releases that pause. That pause allows the ribosome to join. But it also, as soon as the ribosome begins to traverse region 1, it now is no longer pausing. The starting gun has fired. And it's a race for it to go all the way into block 2. If it can't get there to block 2, then 2 and 3 will be free to form the anti-terminator. So it's really a very dynamic thing. It's not just static pictures. If you think about it as the movie now, you see it's moving all the time. And it's just a delicate timing, very finely balanced system. It's a way that translation and transcription are linked. So it's a very elaborate control mechanism that is often cited and put in textbooks because of its intrinsic beauty. Okay. And that was the whole section on trip operon and attenuation. Nothing more you need to know about that. But it's not that hard, but how many have had the attenuator before, the trip operon, in some other course? One? What was it as in-depth as this, or was it was sort of like, you probably were not aware how beautiful it was, and delicate, and marvelous. Anyway, that was my objective, to show you a really beautiful molecular machine.
So just to understand, if there's enough tryptophan, then the ribosomes will see it and then slowly pause there for a second, and then that won't allow it to reach the stop codon.
If there's enough,
yes,
it won't pause.
it won't pause.
It'll zoom all the way to mess with 2. If it messes with 2, the anti-terminator can't happen. if there's enough, you want it to eventually shut down, don't you? So this is the enemy of shutting down, anti-terminator.
So it's almost like when you get to hairpin 1, if there's not enough, it starts to fumble.
Right, it's going come on, somebody's got a tryptophan, let's go, look what's happening. I just released RNA polymerase, it's a race. Can I get to the stop codon before region 3 pops out the exit 4, region 3 pops out the exit 4, and I still haven't got over there to grab 2 by the neck. 2-3 for the anti-terminator. 2-3 for the anti-terminating transcription will let open Pandora's box. Now the whole operon being synthesized. Somebody's going to, the heads are going to roll if we didn't really need all those enzymes. And there's always a story there. Okay. I'm going to erase that now. Well, this erasing is, you got to work up to it gradually. You got to erase a little bit each week, each day, maybe take a day off to kind of build the muscles up, and then eat a lot of protein. And don't let that guy, public, help you with the bag. Okay.
Can I just ask one more question?
Sure. Now I erased it.
So when you have the 3-4 hairpin,
Yeah.
and then you have RNA pol, you want RNA polymerase to be pausing over the poly A region so that it's in the core, that section of A is used, and then it like comes apart. Hairpins always make the RNA pol pause after they're produced. Is that what's happening?
So you've conflated some ideas.
Yeah.
We shouldn't call it a poly A, although it's many A's.
Oh, yeah.
A poly A has a distinct meaning. It's added to the end of a eukaryotic transcript. So it's not in the template. So this stretch of A's so the stretch of A's is, of course, on the bottom strand. And on the top strand, you have a region that is self-complementary. You could form a little rainbow of pairs. You could put a G over here and a C there and a here and a T here, maybe G, G and C, C. You have potential to form a hairpin there. But if you look at the DNA, it's just double-stranded DNA. This configuration means this will always terminate if this can form a hairpin because it is immediately adjacent to the stretch of A's. If you have a stretch of A's on template strand, it actually poses a threat to gene expression, something you need to guard against if you have a hairpin right next to it. If you have hairpins in other places, no consequence.
But you want the RNA polymerase to be stopped.
This actually has to be in the active site. So the A's are here on this strand in this transcription bubble. And the RNA itself, just in the bubble, has to be right over the A's. It's actually and this is such a weak base pairing that if you just let that stay for several seconds, it'll just fall apart. It's not, the attraction's not very great. And so if you don't have a hairpin, you go, well, does it fall apart? Probably at some low probability, but the polymerase is zooming along at about 50 bases per second. So it very seldom does it cause termination damage. It's just when you deliberately exploit this weakness And for good purpose. You can make, that's how you put the brakes on RNA polymerase.
How does the hairpin forming stop pause the RNA?
Okay, so as the RNA comes out the back, if there's potential to form a hairpin, then that loop that comes out will actually bind to the outside surface of the RNA polymerase. It gets stuck as a binding site, you know. It just bends right back there, and that binding site has affinity for double-stranded RNA, which would be the stem of any hairpin form. Cool, huh? Okay. Let's talk about cap, the three classes of cap. That was one I had to go over a little bit fast. And then we'll talk about, if I showed you a picture of the lac operon or the arabinose operon, could you tell me what was in the media? We'll go through some concrete examples. So that gets to be sort of knee-jerk. You can do it quite easily. Okay, so CAP is a positive acting transcription factor. We talked about several repressor proteins, proteins that can act both as a repressor and activator. But CAP is purely for activation. And it's the gatekeeper for the catabolic repression. In other words, it is there to enforce glucose's domination in terms of catabolism. If glucose is in the medium someplace, E. coli is a glucose specialist, and it has learned through its evolutionary path that if it just shuts down all other types of sugar degradation pathways and focuses all of its energy on degrading glucose, that it can win. It can maintain its niche in the gut or in the pile steaming in the sun. So this whole CAP system is designed to enforce that bias in E. coli's metabolism. If glucose is there, it doesn't care. It'll let all the little microbes do the lactose, the arabinose. You guys have fun. It's all yours because I got the glucose. It's all mine. So how do you do that? Well, you make all those other pathways dependent on a positive acting transcription factor. Their promoters are lousy. And the way they are flawed is the minus 35 is almost non-existent. Sigma would have a hard time recognizing that as truly being a promoter. Aha, now you've got it. You supply something that's going to make that promoter attractive, increase the affinity of the polymerase for this lousy promoter, and that something is CAP. CAP is going to bind upstream, and in one way or another, is going to make contact with the polymerase as it sits down and goes, is this a promoter? CAP's going to go, oh yeah, this is a promoter. We'll help you out off the used car lot here. With you just sign these papers. This is a promoter. You don't see a minus 35. Don't worry about it. This is really a promoter. Just grabs it. With increases affinity. The polymerase goes, oh, you really? Okay, I'll give it a try, man. Go ahead. Just go ahead. It'll work. CAP. They're all made dependent on CAP. CAP dependent promoters. So, well, how does glucose regulate that? It turns out CAP is dependent on something. CAP will not bind DNA, will not bind its consensus binding site on the DNA unless it is bound a small signal molecule. Aha, the same scheme. Small molecule acts as a signal to regulate a big molecule. The small signal molecule is cyclic AMP. Glucose regulates the activity of the enzyme that synthesizes cyclic AMP. It inhibits it. Glucose is around, goes, I'm sorry, I can't make any more cyclic AMP. You're done. And without cyclic AMP, CAP is just another stupid protein. It doesn't have any enzymatic activity. It can't even bind DNA. It's absolutely dependent on cyclic AMP. And how does that work? How do you make a protein dependent on a small molecule in its binding to DNA? You can say changes conformation. That's easy to say, but there are a couple of examples we know a lot about, and that is how a small molecule controls the LAC repressor, its binding. That small molecule being a beta-galactoside or a synthetic beta-galactoside, IPTG. And the way it happens in the case of LAC repressor is the two monomers, as they are held together to form a dimer, they can sort of rotate towards and away from each other in terms of the DNA binding domains. If my fists are the helix turn helix regions, you can change the spacing of those two DNA binding domains by whether or not the small signal molecule is present. When the small signal molecule, IPTG, is present, the two binding domains rotate away from each other. In the case of LAC, that means they no longer fit the inverted repeats of the operator. The DNA binding domains are too far apart now, only one at a time. And one at a time is really low affinity. It's low affinity for a purpose. You don't have a perfect inverted repeat. Just so, one monomer is unable to hang on. It's dependent on the syllogism of having two. Deliberately flawed, so it can be regulated. The CAP repressor, the CAP positive active transcription factor is also, it has no enzymatic activity, it's just a DNA binding protein. And it looks just like this. And when it binds cyclic AMP, the two DNA binding domains separate, just like LAC repressor. But in this case, when they separate, they fit the binding site perfectly. They're too close, they start out too close to fit. So you got the same effect. You bind cyclic AMP, they open up from each other. Now it can bind. If that was the LAC repressor, they open up and now they can't bind. You see how there's a lot of redundancy once biological systems discover how to do something. They will use it in many ways. So that's CAP. It really binds DNA as a dimer. When it binds it, it causes a great big kink in the DNA to happen, and we don't really understand, with a lot of speculation, why that may or may not be important. On the slides, I just drew a hypothetical RNA polymerase with the two alphas there. They can now simultaneously bind to both of the monomers because of the bending. That is one hypothesis. It is not because the A's help melt the promoter, though. The A's are too far upstream for that. Okay, CAP. It's a slave to glucose. When glucose is there, no CAP. When CAP is there, no glucose. Glucose, yes. CAP, no. CAP, yes. Glucose, no. If you can say that little stupid thing, then you're halfway to answering the question that I will give you. So I'm going to give you different configurations of these two promoters, arabinose and LAC, And both of them are regulated by the presence of cap. They are cap dependent. So I'll ask you, is glucose present? Just look and see whether cap is there. If cap is there, glucose, no. If glucose is present, you won't see cap anywhere around. Easy thing to do. Is cap there? No glucose. Cap's not there, glucose must be hanging around. Okay. The second question I'll ask you is the inducing substrate there? Is lactose there, or an early derivative? Is a beta-galactoside there? But I'll just ask you, is lactose there? And what do you do then? And then I'll ask you, or I could ask you, is arabinose present? What would be your visual cues there? Well, the easy at a glance cue is there a DNA loop? If a loop is there in both of these operons, the loop is bad news. It means the thing cannot express. The loop is there deliberately to stop expression. So you just look, is there a loop? There you go. You don't even need to see whether the repressor's there or arabinose C is there. Just look at it. If it's a loop, it can't be expressed. And if it's a loop, it also means the small inducing molecule is not there. Because if the sugar was there, then there'd certainly be no loop involved. Okay, so that's the two questions you ask yourself. Break it into a two-question answer. Is glucose present? And then is the small sugar present? So I'm going to give you one here and see if you can get this. Okay, first question, is glucose present? I don't see any cap. Glucose must be present. Is arabinose present? I don't see a loop. Arabinose must be present. Now my last question, is the gene on or off? And this is where I get you. Of course it's off. See, I got you, didn't I? It's off because there's no cap. It's a cap-dependent promoter. He said, jumping up and down. See, you have to always be careful with yourself. As soon as you get that little feeling of euphoric joy, you've got this question nailed, be sure. You're looking, you're going, no loop, everything's ready to go, but no cap, no go. Glucose is there preventing this thing from happening. If I put cap here, now you go, glucose is here and arabinose is here. And will the gene be on? Absolutely. It's cap dependent. Okay. I got about half of you. See if I can make the rest of you fall. You think you know it, but maybe you don't. Let's see. Okay. This is the operator. Okay, so this is the lac operator. The first question is, what's in the media? Is glucose present? You're going, CAP's the answer. I see CAP means glucose no. I see CAP, glucose no. CAP yes, glucose no. Okay, got the half of it done. Now, is lactose present? Well, I see the lac repressor still bound. Is lactose present? No. Ooh, see, you got some of you. Wow, that's a nice frown. I love that when you do that, because it means I got you. You remember the lac repressor has an affinity for any kind of DNA? It's not going to go very far. It's just not going to be bound in an operator. It's going to be bound close by to prevent you from going to medical school. That's why it's there. So there's no loop here. It's not bound at the two operators to form the loop. It's still hanging around. Boy, that's deep level understanding there. Okay. So is the thing going to be on or off? No loop. Okay, everything so far is good. And CAP is present. All systems go. So I prefer thinking about lac and arabinose in these terms instead of having this chart where you've got the sort of the pluses and the minuses and all that. Just drives me crazy. It's much better to understand how something works. Now you can handle any question I throw at you.
Did you say in this drawing that lac is there or isn't?
Lactose is, I said it backwards, didn't I? Lactose is there. I said it backwards, didn't I? See, I can't go to medical school. That's why I'm a combat botanist. Lactose inactivated that repressor, making it so it doesn't bind the operator anymore.
Okay, that makes sense.
Got it back. So this would be lactose, yes. Glucose, no.
So if the lac repressor was at the operator, then there would be no glucose or no lactose.
That's right. Okay. So is the lac operon under positive or negative control? Negative. It has a positive acting transcription factor, CAP. You're right, it is under negative control, and it's under positive control. Well, the daggum. Is that even legal in Florida? Okay. Good old first magnitude. The band wasn't that great last week. Film for posterity. The band was good. It's good. Any questions about operons? You want to talk a little more about arabinose? A little bit, maybe. Okay. So how does the loop block or shut this operon down? Does it prevent opening melting the promoter? What is
It
it?
prevents like the RNA polymerase from binding onto it.
It physically gets in the way of RNA polymerase trying to get down. Just can't, the polymerase can't have access to the promoter. The loop is held too close. Not much difference between where the polymerase needs to sit, because the polymerase needs to sit right there. In fact, the polymerase needs to be snuggled up close and in contact. And so this loop is an effective way to stop transcription. So that's a novel mechanism. The forming a loop does. How does the loop stop expression of the lac operon? In the lac case, the binding is on either side the lac repressor, which is a tetramer, monomer, 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 dimer, dimer. It grabs on both sides of where RNA polymerase sits, and so it provides torsional resistance to opening the two strands like two strands of a rope. If you clamp it on either side of where you need to make the transcription bubble, sigma just has a hard time melting because it's clamped down on either side of where the polymerase sits. That's why it has to bind at least two places simultaneously.
So wait, where's the polymerase in?
Well, the polymerase would be right here.
Oh, so it's like it's
So-
on top of the loop.
Yeah, so you this is going on top. It would be immediately in front, and that would be a little ways upstream.
So it's like almost like it's lassoed by the.
Yeah. You see the picture in the book, it's sort of like this, and they have something blue sitting there. That is not RNA polymerase, the blue. That is cap. So let's say that glucose is present and there is no lactose. Glucose present, then cap yes. Oh, I can't remember one silly thing. Glucose yes, cap no. There's no cap. No cap. This is right here is RNA polymerase. No cap, but the lac repressor is there. And so let's say that now lactose arrives on the scene. Actually, lactose enters the cell and is broken down by a little bit of beta-galactosidase, the enzyme that's always present. Of course, there's a good beta-galactosidase gene right here in the operon too. But that little bit, trace amounts of beta-galactosidase enzyme that's always present generates the actual signal. The first breakdown product of lactose is a beta-galactoside. If the IPTG, we'll say, arrives on the scene, and let's say there's no cap, so it must be some glucose here, right? Yes, glucose present. Okay, so no cap. can you play the movie in your mind, what's going to happen? It's all in a loop. What's going to happen first is IPTG is going to bind between the two cores. What do the cores do? Each monomer has a core, and the two cores hold the monomers together to form a dimer. The two dimers are held together at the C-terminal leucine zipper. So the first thing is, if just either one of them binds IPTG, then you're going to get these DNA binding domains to separate. And as soon as they separate, they're no longer going to fit on the operator. And so we'll draw it here in its new position. And as soon as that happens, that's going to mean that helix 4, right there, the hinge helix, is going to come out of the minor groove and go limp. And this domain is going to even be displaced further. So you've got one monomer. Well, actually, since they're both going out, you got one of the dimers that can't fit anymore. But this one can fit perfectly fine. It'll still stay. But that means that loop's going to go springing open. Now, do you think that the binding of the LAC repressor might inhibit the RNA polymerase? If one of them is still hanging on, especially the one sitting in front? Well, you're going to say, old guy's trying to trick me. Of course. Remember, the LAC repressor increases the affinity of the polymerase for the promoter by binding on the opposite helical face and making contact with the polymerase to stabilize its interaction. If repressor was not there, that polymerase would have no reason to hang around. But would it stop its progress? I would speculate it would. You would keep it there and stop it. You didn't, I mean, it likes to bind the operator. It has bound the operator until the IPTG molecule binds in its core. It's not going to let go. But it's not going to let go of RNA polymerase either. It has a natural affinity. It just can't go anywhere. I would never ask you that. That's too, just pure speculation. That'll be the first speculation I've ever tried out on you guys. Not. Okay. So IPTG arrives on the scene. Would this be active? No, because there's no cap. It's cap dependent. See, I got you twice in the same thing. Hopefully I won't get you a third time.
Can we go back to the Arabinose promoter?
Oh yeah, because I got sidetracked there, didn't I?
We have
Okay.
a P-pad there. Like
This is there's an other one, the
and then
FHG,
FGH.
FGH.
The only difference is like the switch, the cap, and the ARC.
Yeah, so this would be where cap would be in the BAD. And you'll notice that when Arabinose comes, it will bind each of these, and one of them would now occupy inducer site 2. And this turns out to be at position minus 41.5. That's where cap should be. This Arabinose C at Rascal is mimicking the activity of cap. It actually sidles up to the RNA polymerase, makes it all comfy, and makes it so it loves that promoter now. It stabilizes the binding of the RNA polymerase. The loop goes away, so the RNA polymerase now has access. And fortunately, Arabinose C is now in this dimer configuration so that it can provide a high affinity site for the polymerase to land. Cap is also here. So one of the alpha CTDs goes here and the other one goes there. because it has to have simultaneously arabinose C and it has to have cap. So what class cap dependent promoter would this be? 3, right? The clue is it needs 2 positive acting transcription factors, one of which is cap. Okay. What I like to do, I don't talk about it much in lecture, but I should, but I seem to talk about it all the time on exams. I always sneak in something about the galactose promoter. We hardly even mention that thing, right? But on the slide written about this big, he said, you got to know this one too, or I'm going to get you. That is an example of a class 2 promoter, isn't it? Class 2, remember class 2 is the one where the cap is sitting at minus 41.5, period. Only one of them is involved, only one thing there, and that's cap is needed. And it's sitting in that special seat, minus 41.5. When it's sitting in that special seat, it participates or facilitates the melting performed by sigma. It stabilizes sigma enough so it can actually perform a melt. So it would affect the formation of the open promoter complex or the transition from closed to open. How about the other cap dependent promoters where you're not involved in melting? Would they affect formation of the closed promoter complex? Closed promoter complex, of course, is the first thing that happens, the first attraction. The DNA is still double-stranded, not opened up. Answer is yes. They affect formation of that first promoter recognition, closed promoter. It's only the cap2 class, cap-dependent class 2, that affects the transition from closed to open. In other words, the melt. Okay, you know all my silly tricks with Gal. Oh, so I gave you a list of promoters. Could you pick out, just by looking at the names, it'll only be promoters that we talked about in class. Could you tell me which ones have a good minus 35 and those that don't? Yeah, you could. Anyone that's cap dependent is going to have a lousy minus 35. Oh, lactose has a lactoferrin, arabinose, lousy minus 35. Galactose, lousy. All those that use cap have a lousy or non-existent minus 35. But any of the biosynthesis pathways, they have a perfectly good one. No, their default configuration is wide open. They are negatively regulated. Everything works, and you just put the squash on it. It doesn't need anything. It just needs. It only has an off button. Okay. Any questions on bacterial transcription? Have a look through those notes, yeah.
The triptophan doesn't involve anything to do with the cap, right? So
It's a biosynthesis. It's not regulated by glucose. Nothing involved at all. So it should have a very good minus 35. So transcription is fascinating, but on the exam we have other topics, right? Repair. What's the other one on there? Is it just repair? Yeah. The basics of transcription, how operons work, And the very first thing we covered was repair. So it's been a while since you've gone over repair, but the things you'll need to know there are, there's a figure that has the MUT SLH drawn on there. I think it has kind of a dark shale blue background, something I redrew myself. I just love that figure so much. I was like, in second grade, I could take it home, put it on the refrigerator. You might see it on the exam with arrows pointing to different proteins, with you having to identify what's what. But I won't be as straightforward as saying, show me MUT-L. I'll say, show me the protein that connects to the beta clamp. I know what they all are, but I still can't do this question. That goes medical school. So know what each of those proteins in the MUT system does. H, what does H do? Somebody volunteer.
It's not that next thing, right?
It's the frustrated endonuclease. It knows where it needs to bite, but it's got no false teeth. It just can't chop unless it gets a bump. Somebody comes up behind it and bumps it and goes, oh yeah, well, I cut that right strand and everything. Which strand does it cut? Because that's the big decision. That's the whole raison d'etre. MUT-H. Its job is to determine which is the new strand, because the new strand, by definition, has a mistake. It's looking for the unmethylated A at the DAM methylation site, GATC. And who is it that bumps it in the back? And that bump causes it to cut. L, MUT-L. Old Butterfingers L. Can't keep its cafeteria tray upright. Bumbling down between the seats. No room here, really. There's no room. I know there's one bed. You shouldn't sit there, please. And you sit there, you and your face goes down in your suit, and you bite the unmethylated A. You can't help yourself. Because you're MUT-H. Okay, what did MUT-L used to do? Way back in the Hadrian epoch.
Did it have endonuclease next to it?
MUT-L?
Did it have somewhat endonuclease next to it?
Yeah, it used to have the nuclease activity. And every other thing, it is the nuclease. It is a nuclease. But why does it need to cut?
Because we don't have MUT-H. Only E. coli. Right?
Yeah, nothing has MUT-H except the gamma proteobacteria. Salmonella and E. coli. That's the extent of my introductory microbe that I can remember. Otherwise, it was just a lot of smelly goo on plates. Didn't really take a lot from that course. Smell the flowers. No, thank you. So, how does everything else know which strand to cut?
Don't we think there are like bots that go around field?
Bots?
And there's like torsional information.
Topological bumps. Things that go bump in. So, MUT-S recognizes the mismatch itself, and it's because there's a bulge. The bases don't fit together properly. In the double-stranded helix, there'll be a little bulge where there's a mismatch. But probably it's not looking for the bulge, it's testing the strength of the bond, probably. But so MUT-S in everything identifies the mismatch. There it is, mismatch. You guys take it from here, I don't know what to do. As soon as it recognizes a mismatch, it finds ATP, changes its configuration, and now it is attracted for binding by MUT-L. MUT-L comes down and says, you found one, I'll be right there, and latches onto it. Now they're a team, L and S. And then they go traveling away from that mismatch. You go, that's kind of crazy. They just found it, and now they're moving away from it. Yep, they are on the prowl. They've got to go find the answer to the question, which is the right strand to cut. But that mismatch is still there, and if there's another MUT-S around, it'll bind it. So it takes more than one MUT-S to make this whole thing work, but that's allowed. There's a lot of MUT-S around. So you got one there marking the spot, and the others teamed up with MUT-L, and they're just sliding by thermal Brownian movements, sort of just randomly sliding one way until they bump into H. And H just when it doesn't know these guys are looking for it. It's just on its own looking for a DAM methylation site so it can chew. It's always hungry, but it can't bite. And it has found one, and it's sitting there as a bunch of largely bumping. And S and L come up, and who does the bumping? L. So L now is connected to two of the proteins. It has affinity for H, has affinity for S. The cut is made in the new strand. What do you need to do next? You need to peel it back. And you can peel it back 1,000 bases to get back to where that mismatch was, all the way back. So you peel it all the way back, and there's a MUT-S sitting there that got left behind. And it stops peeling it back just on the other side of the mismatch. That's a little bit mysterious. Who does the unwinding? Which MUT does that? No MUT. It's a UVRT that does that. MUT-L is responsible for that too. It's like the coordinator. It says it has affinity for the UVRT, the helicase. And MUT-L is busy. Okay, so it recruited something from another pathway. Maybe the other pathway recruited it from the MUT. It's just a nomenclature thing. Maybe it's equally a member of both. True. Okay, so you got it unwound. Now this is a repair operation. Which DNA polymerase do you use to fill in the strand you just removed? You'd normally use one. That's the repair enzyme, but this is not normal. This uses 3, the replicase. And that is strange. And to me, that's a big clue, indicating that's a remnant from how it used to work. Because now you have this connection to replication, and replication becomes where all the information now resides, and everything else is E. coli, the information regarding which is new strand, which is old strand. Just about how it comes out of the enzyme, you can tell which is new strand. So if you've got to get up there right on the replicase all the time, checking for which is a new strand so you know which one to cut. And everything else except E. coli, just waits for methylation, so easier thing. So even in eukaryotes, there's a connection to the replicase. And what is that connection to replicase that the MUT-L makes in both kingdoms? Is it a subunit of the core of the polymerase? It's the ring, it's the clamp. PCNA, it has affinity in eukaryotes, and in E. coli, it has affinity for the beta clamp. Because DNA Pol 1 could do it just in E. coli perfectly well. So I think that is an evolutionary remnant. It works fine, why change it?
Sorry, did you say L had affinity for the PC?
Yes, the L is being connected to everything now. L has affinity for S, for H, for UBRD, and the beta clamp.
This might not be relevant for the exam, but
Yeah,
the replicase is going along, it's fixing the mismatch. But it's just one strand, so isn't it just using one of the two units? But either the so it doesn't
well, in UCAS, you got a delta and an epsilon.
Oh, right.
You have a polymerase dedicated anyway. Even in E. coli, you have two monomers to make a dimeric Pol 3. So it uses one of the two units. Doesn't need both. Okay. So that MUT system, I find very interesting because that's a really important question that the repair system has to ask, which is the new strand. We're still a little mysterious, but if the molecules hadn't worked it out, we'd all not be here now. Okay, so there's a whole series of these MUT things, right, that you need to know what they do. There's one slide that has them all on it. This one slide that's got MUT T, MUT M, MUT Y, and it's all in relationship to a base modification, a modified G, 8-oxy G. 8-oxy G, not that bad, little tangy, but it's a nuisance because it can base pair with an A instead of a C. So you want to stop it. So how do you stop it at the deoxynucleotide level? Let's say one of your deoxy G's got 8-oxy modified. You tell them about chemistry. We say modified. That's an enzyme name that does that, and I have no idea what it is. If you have a nucleotide that has the 8-oxy modification, who destroys it? MUT-T for nucleotide. If you have an 8-oxy G embedded into double-stranded DNA, and it's across from a C, how is it gotten rid of? MUT-M. M for 2 become 1. 2 strands of DNA, double-stranded DNA, matrimony. I remember it. Was that mortgage I can't remember. And how about if you had an 8-oxy G and it had mismatched and it paired with an A, which it sometimes does, how would you get rid of the A? MUT-Y is the adenyl glycosylase. Okay. So which of these takes care of slippage? Now, if you have a string of A's, a string of T's or something, sometimes you'll get out of register when you're trying to synthesize. And you'll get a little loop where you have an insertion or small deletion there. Who goes in and corrects that?
Like MSH2 and 3. In eukaryotes.
MHS. MSH, yes. It's S, right, MUT-S, but in eukaryotes, MUT-S is called MUT-S homolog. So it's MSH. Right. 2, 3. And then there's 2 and 6. What does 2 and 6 do? In yeast. Single mismatch, a normal mismatch. What is RAD4? They're a DOMA thing that doesn't have XPC. C, yeah. But what is its job, RAD4? It recognizes the mismatch, so And that's in that global scanning. And it does by flipping out the bases that are okay instead of the bases that are damaged, in the case of a thymine dimer.
Does MUT-S also do what MSH 2,6 does, the single nucleotide?
Yes, it does it in E. coli, also the MUT-S. But in combination with L.
So it needs L for the single nucleotide, but not for the slippage.
And you know, I haven't thought about it deeply, but you know, in that situation, you need to know which is the new strand. Let's say you missed an A. You'd have a bulge in the template. It would look like the template was bad. So it'd be important to know which was the methylated and unmethylated strand. It would probably involve the whole system, but the book likes to emphasize the role of MUT-S. Okay, how about UVR? UVR A, B, C, D. Which complex recognizes the damage, the thymine dimer? A and B together, actually. Yeah, but it needs to be there. And there's a newer diagram there where it shows everything has two copies. Like B goes on either side of the thymine dimer, and then there are two A's on either side of it. So when is ATP involved in that story? So it's found in several different places. Is it when A joins B and they begin their journey together? No, it's when they say goodbye. It's a little, I guess, a parting present. Okay, go ahead. I know it's burning a hole in your pocket. Get rid of that ATP. You had it this long, and you go, oh, good, I breathe. When's another time ATP is burned?
It nicks, I think C.
Yeah, when C does the cutting. It sort of has to be bribed. And then UVRD. It's a helicase, of course, it uses ATP. And which is the enzyme that fills in the gap left? Pol-1. Fine, Pol-1 involved in repair. What's Pol-1's day job? It's repairing after DNA replication, the lagging strand. That's a big job. Okay. Be familiar with the deamination products of C and 5-methyl-C. What does C, when it deaminates, what does it change to? A U. What does 5-methyl-C turn into? T.
Can we go over the Lex A?
Lex A.
Yeah.
Okay. Help. SOS. Error-prone repair. So the Lex system suppresses or represses high activity. It doesn't completely shut things down because a lot of times there'll be two promoters, one to go at a low constitutive rate, and then you'll have a really jazzed up hot promoter that's being repressed by LEX-A. But LEX-A represses a whole series of genes that enable error-prone repair to happen. That's why you need it tightly controlled. You don't want error-prone repair to happen unless you're trying to mutate your way out of a bad situation. That's a last stopgap kind of response. So lots of things are repressed, including LEX-A itself. It auto-regulates, sort of like the TRP repressor. And this is a kind of a simple repressor in its mechanism. It just gets in the way of the RNA polymerase directly. But it has one added twist. It can be regulated because it has the ability to cut itself in two. There's a stretch of amino acids in between the oligomerization domain that holds the two monomers together to form a dimer and its DNA binding domain. There's a little sensitive spot there that if you twist it right, it's unstable and it falls apart. Autoproteolysis. But it has to be induced into that special configuration before it'll do that, and that's the job of REC-A. REC-A only assumes that other role of seeking out a couple of targets in the cell to cause them to cut themselves in two. Only under conditions of extreme mutagenesis. Could be presence of single-strand DNA, lots of ATP around. At least that can trigger that conformational change in vitro. So it will, when it changes to activated or active REC-A, it now seeks out a couple of targets. One of those targets is LEX-A, causes LEX-A to cut itself in two, and now it can't bind DNA because it can't hold together as a dimer. It needs a synergism of simultaneously binding two subunits before it has high enough affinity to really bind tightly. What's the other target of REC-A? It's a subunit, yeah, you know back there. It's a subunit of an error-prone DNA polymerase, right? Is it Paul 5? Paul 4? Is it Paul 4 or 5? Can't remember looking at you. You're leading down the wrong path. Is it 5, isn't it? Yeah. It's 5.
It is.
5. It's got a crazy name like U-Mu. No, U-Mu. I was here first. U-Mu-D turns into U-Mu-D prime, which is now in its active form. So you have an error-prone DNA polymerase that's just hanging around ready to do something, but you've got it on lockdown, so it can't be active unless you really have extreme mutagenesis conditions. So I like to ask the question about, and it takes some explaining, sometimes it's not clear, what's the reason that LEX-A regulates its own synthesis? So first of all, you have to realize why that sounds crazy before you can give an answer. When REC-A is activated, it's trying to disable LEX-A, right? Well, if you disable LEX-A, you end up making more LEX-A because it controls its own synthesis too. So it seems to be working against its overall purpose. REC-A comes in here and turns on the production of more LEX-A just so it has more stuff to cause that it can destroy. Yep. And that's what happens. So how is that any good? It sounds backwards, doesn't it? What it means is, as soon as you don't have a lot of activated REC-A around, you are still pumping out as fast as you can perfectly good LEX-A. And because of that, you get rapid shutdown of everything LEX-A controls, which is perfect because you're out of the mutagenesis woods. You need to keep all that error-prone stuff, put it back in its cage. It's to facilitate a rapid counter response, rapid reestablishment of repression as soon as the levels of activated REC-A get low enough. Running out of questions. There's some homework questions about that seem a little strange to you about pull down, GST pull down, and about temperature effect on a promoter. These have to do with slides I removed that describe techniques. DMS footprinting, I went through this morning and removed all questions on the exam that are related to that. So you shouldn't have any. If there are any that slip through, I'll go back and hand grade them like I had to do exam 2. Run out of questions. Anybody have any questions about anything?
What do we need to know about the two right pathways?
So the two.
Right pathways.
Oh yeah, retrieval repair. We didn't talk about that. And that's where you have a thymine dimer. It stops DNA replication because the polymerase can't properly configure those two T's that are linked to each other side by side. It doesn't know to put an A across from them because they're out of alignment. They can't be flipped one at a time so you mean in the proper position to receive the incoming complementary base. So you still have the T's there and transcription has stopped. So what do? Well, you still have the original template there, but that original template is now being involved in making the other strand. You got it split, remember? And so what you end up doing is, let me draw it so it's sort of, anybody have a watch? I don't have a
251.
251. So you have the original DNA acting as template, and then the new strand, let's say it's a leading strand in this case, it comes to a stop because it doesn't know how to put A's across from two T's that are cross-linked to each other in the thymine dimer. And so you got two problems here. You've got to get rid of the T's, and you've got to somehow figure out how to continue on. You can't continue on, and if you cut the two T's out, then this thing separates and floats away. So you do it in a couple of steps. Your first question or first problem is, let's figure out what's across, what's here, so that when these two things are cut out, we'll be able to know to put T's back in there, because you don't want to repair the T's if you don't know what goes opposite them. So first step is, let's build this region out so we can now remove the T's. And where do you find that region? Well, it's right here, that other strand which used to be annealed up there. So you cut out that region there, you retrieve it, and you put it in place. Okay. Second step now, you can remove the cross-link T's, and it's repaired as non-cross-link T's. So that's the simplified diagram. Of course, it's a more complicated molecular process. But this kind of event involves recombination. This kind of strand exchange would be a perfect playground for Rec A. So Rec A is involved in this kind of repairs. not just recombination, but it's a recombination directed repair. But it has special playmates. It has rec F and G that assist it when it performs this role. Of course, you can look at the diagrams, you can see that this goes forward, then it backs up. Anyway, it'll form something that looks like sort of a holiday structure. But you won't need to know it in that detail. Retrieval repair. What, the eukaryotic situation, you're going to need to know APE1. It recruits two kinds of repair DNA polymerases. It recruits the replicases, epsilon and delta, in one situation, and it recruits DNA pol beta, which is the normal repair one, in other situations. So you remember that slide that has the two parallel pathways? There's long patch and short patch, and long patches on the left, short patches on the right. And when they say short patch, they really mean short, right? It's like one nucleotide. And when they mean long patch, it's like 10 or 12. Long patch is with any other system or any prokaryotic system, that's certainly short patch. And so what's the decision point as to whether it's going to go so-called long patch or definitely short patch? APE1's involved both places, and APE1 makes the decision who to recruit to the site of the damage.
If APE has neck, then it goes into long, but if it doesn't, it's short.
Right. So on the left, which is where the lice did the nicking. I mean, right, I'll say on the right of the diagram. That's short. Yeah, that's correct. So there's an enzyme that will introduce a nick, the lyase. A glycosylase would be first in base pair rescission. So that removes the base, and there's a question of whether the lyase will come in as a second step and introduce the nick, or whether the nick's going to have to be introduced by APE1. And depending on whether it has to act as a endonuclease or not, will determine whether it recruits delta epsilon or beta. Tell me the connection between transcription in a eukaryote and nucleotide excision repair. What subunit of transcription, which we'll start on next week, which basic subunit of a transcription factor in a eukaryote is also involved heavily in nucleotide excision repair?
TF2H.
TF2H. And what particular subunits of H? And what functions do they perform? What kind of, they have enzymatic activity in a sense. They're helicases, aren't they? B and D. And I can't remember whether it's B or D that is the primary one for nucleotide excision repair at the moment. I'm thinking it's D, I don't know, flip the coin.
RAD3 is also B,
Right. RAD
3 is
3 is another name for it in yeast.
that the main one?
Yeah, I can't remember whether that's XPB or XPD. Can you name some enzymes that use a flipping type of mechanism?
Methylases and glycosylases.
Methylases, like adenosyl glycosylase, and Rad4. And how about the RNA polymerase itself? They kind of flip a strand as they put it in the right configuration for transcription. But that's usually not considered a flipase.
Are we gonna have to label like the functional domains of the sigmas? Like,
Oh, the functional domains of sigma. Yeah, that's a whole complicated nightmare, isn't it? You won't have to label them. Wait a minute. You might have to label one. You know, the one that pokes its head through the RNA exit pore that makes contact with the 5' end of the transcript. Which one is that? That's sticking in like a moray eel, sticking its head.
Is it the 1.1?
3.2 is bumping heads with that new transcript. New transcript trying to push it out the exit pore. You don't have RNA polymerase transcription dreams? I guess only old men dream. That's a country song. Okay, how about what does domain 1.1 do? Yeah, back there you can make it into a rap song.
In the channel.
Yeah, it lays in the channel before DNA gets there, and then it's displaced. How about domain 2.3? Melts. How about 2.4? Recognizes the TA of the -10. How about 3? Woohoo. Recognizes the extended tata. How about, what's a discriminator? Element in the bacterial promoter between -10 and +1, isn't it? What interacts with it? Is that like 1.2 or something? I can't remember. What makes contact with -35? .2. Tippecanoe. Okay. What kind of DNA binding domain what kinds? We studied 2. We're only going to cover 3 in the entire course. Interact with the minor groove of DNA. You ready to do? Which one? This alpha CTD, and it's a helix hairpin helix, not a helix helix. Minor groove. What's another thing that interacts with minor groove? The hinge helix of the lac repressor. What's another name for the hinge helix? Helix 4. 1, 2, 3 is involved in the DNA binding domain at the N-terminus. The next helix down is helix 4. That's the hinge helix. It is not really a helix most of the time, except when it's up there in that minor groove configuration. What's the purpose of the C-terminal leucine zipper of the lac repressor?
It binds the 2 to make a dimer. Like the 2
No, like you
would.
would. Yeah, close, but it binds the 2 dimers together to make a tetramer. The 2 monomers are held together by interactions between their core domains. What's the ratio between sigma and core subunits? Of course, you don't need as much sigma because sigma is only involved part of the time during transcription, right? 1 to 3, because you look at that pie chart, The top half of it is just the core bound to non-promoter. You don't need sigma there. Then at the bottom, it's split into two, 25 percenters. Only one of those is where you use sigma. That's in promoter recognition, initiation. What's the triggering event that causes the transition from initiation into elongation? Right. Sigma gets bumped in the face because it's got domain 3.2 sticking its head in the RNA exit form, that nascent transcript. Finally, bloodies its nose, pushes it out. It releases its hold on the polymerase, and the polymerase now is able to move from the promoter. How is it able to transcribe the aborted transcripts if it can't move? How does it do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? Scrunching, DNA scrunching into the active site. What's probably the most conserved domain of sigma? Domain 2 generally, and because it's where it makes contact with the core. Of course, it does some other pretty vital things to it, but it wouldn't be conserved, right? Because sigmas vary as to their recognition sites. So it functionally is conserved, but if sigma can recognize many promoters because there's so many kinds of sigma, but the domain that actually makes contact with the core remains the same, it's highly conserved. Tell me about sigma 54. Who does it, what other protein does it need in order to be fully functional? Is it NTRC? NTR1? NTRC? I'm getting confused with the anti-repressor and the anti-activator. NTRC. NTRC. What does NTRC plus ATP allow sigma 54 to do? Fix that problem it's got. Allows it to finally melt a promoter. It can't melt. What's its other defect? What is it missing? 1.1. So that allows it to sort of act like a eukaryotic transcription factor. It can go ahead of the core and identify a promoter. That's how eukaryotes do it. Because, I mean, why is that? Why missing 1.1? Why does that allow it to bind on its own? The promoter.
Like 4.2 and 1.1.
It's not masking. 1.1 bends back and masks the recognition site for the -35. It masks domain 4.2. You cut that off, then you don't do that. So if sigma does not have to bind core first, how does it ever meet up with the core? Because core is pretty happy without sigma, just clamp down on non-promoter DNA, isn't it? Does this mean core has to float off and go looking for poor sigma 54? Sigma 54, where are you? I've never seen that discussed in the literature, but of course, I know how it works because I'm a smarty pants. I just make stuff up. So here's my little make stuff up idea. Well, if you look at how it's used, it's always downstream of a promoter that uses sigma 70. That's a constitutive one. It's always going. And then you have this promoter that's regulated by 54 sitting downstream. So you have an opportunity to see core. But core is not going to pass right over top of you because you are sigma. You're sitting there going, that was here first. It's like sigma's almost acting like a repressor. Why would sigma leave if the polymerase goes, excuse me? I'm RNA polymerase, you know, big guy. Sigma. So that's an opportunity where it gets pretty close to a core. And I'm thinking there's a little switcheroo going on there. Like, so the circuit's clown, then they'll pile out and then go back in, and somebody's left behind. They switch sigmas maybe. I don't know, maybe sigma 54 can displace regular sigma and take its place. I have no idea. That's how I would do it. I'd drive the clown car up and have a little fire drill. I can't think of any more questions, and I think it's about 3 o'clock. Okay, I will close the recording at least at this time. If any people want to hang around and study, you're welcome to do this. I'll leave the room for you. So good luck late Monday night. You end up taking it.